But we've also been touching base with Chriselda Lewis this morning. Chriselda, what's the latest? What can you tell us?
Well, Desiree, there's still very little activity here in Orlando, here in Soweto, where it's just quite a few media houses that have gathered here outside the house of the late struggle stalwart Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Just outside here, one of those who was the private security of the late struggle stalwart gathered here behind us. We've not seen any family members at this stage who have come here to the house, but just a short moment ago, the family has released a statement announcing the death of Ambassador Zindzi Mandela, and basically saying that they will communicate later on in the week pertaining to a memorial service and a funeral as well. So very little activity taking place here at the moment. But the woman that we're looking at here today, Zindzi Mandela, developed at a very early age, Desiree, a precarious compassion for her mother's afflictions. We hear outside that home. When she was 12, you'd recall Zindzi writing to the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid, urging them to press the South African government to provide security for her and her mother. You know, the family and her mother's friends. She had told the United Nations fear that, an atmosphere was being built in the country at the time for something terrible to happen to her mother. You'd recall that when Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela had been banished to Bramford, she was done so together with her daughter. And, she said at the time that her mother had been a victim of several attacks, and that she believed that the attacks themselves were politically motivated. I mean, if we look at dating back, in 1974, a prominent schoolboy here, activist in Soweto, died in a parcel bomb attack. And it was feared that the Mandela girls, whose home here in Soweto had been attacked, would be next on that list. So Zindzi was to later recall, later in her life, how she became, some would have said, totally immune to these threats. She had been quoted at the time as having said her mother had made them strong, saying that in part of, her soul, they had become strong. Once in court, relating to some of these issues, she had spoken about how they had to remain strong as children, and how she feared at the time that something terrible was going to happen to her family. So not much activity taking place here at the moment, apart now from this statement, of course, that was released by the family. Also in her poetry, on the other hand, had also revealed quite a sadness on the part of Zindzi Mandela. In about 1978, a collection of her poems had been published under the title Black As I Am. You'd recall that, Desiree. The book was dedicated to her parents, and the opening poem spoke of her feelings about her father. So this was someone who never had what others would call a normal life, always at the forefront of developments at a difficult time in South Africa, where her father incarcerated at the time, her mother having to carry that baton and keep that flame alive, and as a young girl also standing there and making sure that where her mother sometimes could not hold that fort, she would stand up and also be part of those young people who said no to the apartheid government. So I think certainly at this time, as she is being remembered as the ambassador to Denmark in that top diplomatic position, which she held, of course, it is very important to go back to this young person who lived this life with those in the forefront of the struggle for freedom in this country, and also didn't sit by, as you rightly corrected in our previous crossings, Desiree. She had her own political afflictions in her own right. She was someone who stood up and didn't mince words about quite a number of things, this post the death of her father and post the death of her mother. So certainly a lot would be said about that by family, friends and those who worked with the late Ambassador Zindzi Mandela, but not forgetting, of course, what she too had suffered. She had never lost the opportunity. When she spoke about that, I recall in one of the talks that she gave, she spoke about her voice and how the voice itself should not be silenced. And we saw that over a number of years, how she didn't mince her words about the current political atmosphere in South Africa, and some of the issues that she felt her father or her mother would not be happy about. But certainly someone also, as we stand here outside the home of Mamu Chriselda Mandela, will recall, of course, how she too made sure that while we spoke about her late father and his contribution towards the fight against apartheid in this country, the legacy of her mother should not be forgotten. And she made those feelings quite known in a number of ways in which she spoke to us as the media, and when she spoke about issues that had affected South Africa, whether it be good or whether she felt they were bad. You'd recall, of course, Desiree, one of the things that I hear feature quite prominently in some of the speakers that you spoke to this morning, in the interviews that you have conducted, is how she spoke on the issue of land. And those may be some of the issues that you would recall that others would say would have gotten her into trouble in the diplomatic sphere, but she was not one to mince her words, certainly, about what was taking place, despite what others would have deemed as repercussions that others that might have followed subsequent to that, but certainly not someone to keep quiet. And most I hear in the tributes that would continue to come over the next couple of days, that's certainly the word that we will hear from many of the mourners. But outside here at the Soweto home, I think, Desiree, especially given that this comes at a time where South Africa, just as announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday, you're unlikely to see, a lot of members of the African National Congress, for example, or members of the public, or even just outside here in the street. It's extremely quiet. The neighbors here in this neighborhood also remain in their homes, and exactly what you're seeing here behind me is just that, some members of the household here behind me just sitting outside. But in addition to that, absolutely nothing else, apart from that statement released a few moments ago by the family announcing the passing of Ambassador Zindzi Mandela, and indicating that they will inform the public later on this week on a memorial service and a funeral. I think the family certainly still struggling to come to terms at this stage, asking for space at this point, obviously, to see how they will communicate what processes will follow going forward. So as we await for that, Desiree, very quiet outside the Orlando West home here in Soweto.
Chriselda, while we have you, you may know or not know this, but I'm just wondering if any of your sources have alerted you to anything. Julius Malema, who was very close to Ambassador Mandela, posting on social media today, on Instagram, a black screen, and also saying this hopeless leadership cannot even inspire confidence at a time when we need it the most. Our loved ones are falling by the wayside. We're first headed to a dark-spirited period of depression and hopelessness. Sad day indeed, with broken hearts emojis there. Do we know anything about the background of these tweets?
Desiree, I must say I'm of the firm belief, in particular in times of death, speculation is certainly something that I would not want to entertain as a journalist at this particular point. Desiree, as black people, when someone has passed on, that is exactly what we're here to report on today, on the passing of a child who never had a normal life. The family has asked for privacy at this point to obviously digest what has happened. They will communicate, obviously, in due course. But I'm sure a lot would be said at this point. And what I can certainly say, I don't want to go into any tweets or Instagram posts, things that have been posted on social media. But what I do know is that the late ambassador and the EFF leader, Julius Malema, did enjoy a very close relationship. And there were certain ideals that Zindzi Mandela had spoken about, which were in agreement to that of the EFF leader, Julius Malema. You'd recall, of course, at a time, at the passing of Mamu Madikizela Mandela, I know that Zindzi Mandela had also shown very warm heart towards Julius Malema. Her late mother, of course, having treated Julius Malema as a son. And we know that the relationship between Julius Malema and her mother had been one that was very close. But at this particular point, Desiree, I must say, as a journalist, I would be most comfortable, as a black journalist, be comfortable about talking about the legacy at this point of Ambassador Zindzi Mandela and the fight that she fought together alongside that of her mother and her father. I don't think she had a childhood like any one of us. Her mother being banished to Bramford, her having to hold the fort as young as she was, having to stand in front of the masses and communicate a letter back in 1985, basically saying to the then state president, P.W. Botha, that her father would not stand for any apology pertaining to denouncing what the then state president had said he should about political violence in the country at that particular point. So there's a lot of speculation that's going to take place at this point. A lot is going to be said, but you'll forgive me. I think I would stick to, as a black journalist, in respect of the death of Zindzi Mandela at this point, report exactly on what the family is communicating at this point. Desiree, a lot is certainly going to be said, and we do know that Julius Malema and Zindzi Mandela had shared a very close relationship. But I think at this particular point, what will be most important is to highlight her legacy and what exactly it is that she stood for. The rest, I guess, will be a conversation for another day. This is just hours after her passing, Desiree.
Thank you so much. Chriselda Lewis is outside the Mandela family home, the home of also the late former Miss Winnie Madikizela Mandela.